August 1983, Manhattan Beach, California. A mother picks up her 2-year-old son from the McMartin preschool. That night, she notices something concerning and takes him to a doctor. Based on her report, she calls the police. Her accusation: a teacher at the preschool, Ray Bucky, has sexually abused her son. The police investigate. They send a letter to 200 families whose children attend McMartin preschool, asking if their children have been molested. The letter mentions Ray Bucky by name and asks parents to question their children. What happens next will destroy lives, bankrupt families, send innocent people to prison, and reveal something terrifying about American society. Given the right conditions, we will believe absolutely anything. Within months, hundreds of children will have disclosed abuse. Not just abuse, ritualistic satanic abuse. The children will describe being forced to participate in satanic rituals. They'll say they were taken to secret tunnels under the school. They'll report witnessing animal sacrifices, being forced to drink blood, being photographed in satanic rituals. Parents will discover evidence of satanic activity everywhere. In children's toys, in rock music, in Dungeons and Dragons games. Therapists will uncover repressed memories of satanic ritual abuse in thousands of adults. Police will search for vast underground networks of devil worshippers who abuse children. The panic will spread nationwide. Hundreds of people will be accused. Dozens will be imprisoned. Families will be destroyed. Careers will be ruined. And none of it will be real. Not the satanic rituals. Not the vast conspiracy. Not the recovered memories. None of it. This is the story of the Satanic Panic. How America spent a decade hunting monsters that didn't exist and destroyed real lives in the process. The McMartin preschool case. Let's go back to that initial accusation in 1983. The mother who reported Ray Bucky had a history of mental illness. She was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. Her accusations were bizarre and constantly changing. She claimed her son had been abused at the preschool, but also at other locations by multiple people, including strangers. A rational investigation would have treated her claims with skepticism. Instead, the police took them seriously and sent that letter to 200 families, essentially asking, "Has your child been molested?" Here's what happened when parents received that letter. They started interrogating their children. "Did Mr. Ray touch you? Did anything bad happen at school?" Young children 3, 4, 5 years old were asked leading questions by anxious parents who desperately wanted to protect them. Many children initially said nothing happened. Their parents, convinced the police wouldn't have sent the letter without cause, kept asking. Some children, wanting to please their parents or confused by the questions, started saying yes. The children were then sent to a diagnostic center called Children's Institute International, CII. A social worker named Key McFarlane interviewed them. Her techniques were the opposite of proper forensic interviewing. She used leading questions, praised children when they disclosed abuse, and dismissed denials as evidence of trauma. She used anatomically correct dolls and asked children to show what happened. When children played with dolls in normal ways, kids explore dolls. She interpreted it as disclosure of abuse. She asked if children had been photographed naked. If they said no, she'd say, "I know you're scared, but you can tell me." If they said yes, she'd praise them. Children learned that saying yes made the adults happy. The disclosures escalated. At first, children described relatively normal, though still serious, abuse, inappropriate touching. But as the interviews continued, the stories became increasingly bizarre. Children said they'd been taken to secret tunnels under the school. They described satanic rituals with candles and robes. They said teachers killed animals in front of them. They claimed they were forced to participate in killing babies. They said they were photographed naked and the photos were used in child pornography. One child described being flushed down a toilet and taken to secret rooms. Another said they flew through the air to different locations. The stories became physically impossible, but nobody questioned them. By the end, 360 children were identified as victims. 7 teachers were charged with 115 counts of child abuse. The trial would become the longest and most expensive in American history. The media amplification, The media treated the McMartin case as an explosive expose of hidden child abuse. News coverage was sensational and assumed guilt. Parents appeared on talk shows describing the horrific abuse their children had disclosed. Reporters investigated, looking for corroborating evidence. They found none. No tunnels, no photographs, no witnesses. But this lack of evidence was interpreted as proof of how sophisticated the conspiracy was. The defendants' lives were destroyed before trial. Ray Buckey spent 5 years in jail waiting for trial. His mother, Peggy McMartin Buckey, who owned the school, was also charged. Their reputations were annihilated. The school closed. Their financial resources were exhausted on legal defense. And this was just the beginning. The McMartin case would inspire similar accusations across the country. Michelle remembers. To understand how America became primed for satanic panic, we need to go back to 1980, 3 years before McMartin. A book called Michelle Remembers was published. Written by Michelle Smith and her psychiatrist, later husband, Lawrence Posner. It claimed to be Michelle's recovered memories of satanic ritual abuse she suffered as a child. According to the book, Michelle was abused by a satanic cult in Victoria, British Columbia. She described rituals, torture, witnessing murders, and encounters with Satan himself. The book was marketed as true. Posner became an expert on satanic ritual abuse. He consulted on criminal cases. He gave training seminars to social workers and law enforcement. He helped create the framework that would be used to interpret children's statements at McMartin and other cases. There's just one problem. None of it was true. Investigations found no evidence supporting Michelle's claims. People she claimed participated in the cult were provably elsewhere. The entire narrative was fabricated, either deliberately or through a combination of false memories and therapeutic suggestion. But by the time the truth emerged, the damage was done. Michelle Remembers had created a template. Now people knew what satanic ritual abuse looked like. Now therapists knew what questions to ask. Now the panic had a framework. The cultural groundwork. Why were Americans so ready to believe in satanic conspiracies in the 1980s? Several cultural factors created the perfect storm. Religious anxiety. The 1980s saw a rise in evangelical Christianity and concern about secularization. Many Americans were genuinely worried about declining moral values and the influence of secular culture. Childhood sexual abuse awareness. The 1980s also saw legitimate increased awareness of child sexual abuse. After decades of denial, society was finally acknowledging this real problem. But the pendulum swung too far, from denial to credulity. Stranger danger. Parents were increasingly anxious about threats to their children. Missing children on milk cartons, media coverage of kidnappings. The perception was that predators were everywhere. Pop culture fears. Heavy metal music, Dungeons and Dragons, horror movies, these were blamed for corrupting youth. Parents saw occult symbolism everywhere and interpreted it as literal rather than aesthetic. Conspiracy thinking. The 1980s culture included distrust of institutions combined with belief in hidden threats. This created receptiveness to conspiracy theories about organized abuse rings. All of these factors converged. When the McMartin case broke, it activated every fear simultaneously. Child abuse, Satanism, conspiracy, hidden evil. It was the perfect moral panic. The daycare cases. After McMartin, similar accusations erupted at daycare centers across America. The pattern was always the same. One child makes an accusation, or a parent makes an accusation on behalf of a child. Police and parents begin investigating. Children are interviewed using suggestive techniques. The accusations escalate to include satanic rituals. Media coverage is sensational. The community is traumatized. Lives are destroyed. Kern County, California. Dozens of people were accused of being part of a satanic sex ring. Several were convicted and spent years in prison before their convictions were overturned. Fells Acres Day School, Massachusetts. The Amirault family, Violet Amirault and her children Gerald and Cheryl, were accused of ritualistic abuse. Gerald was sentenced to 30 to 40 years in prison based on testimony that included children claiming to have been abused by a clown in a secret room and being tied naked to a tree in public. Witnesses confirmed no incidents. He served 18 years before being released. Wenatchee, Washington. In the 1990s, a sex abuse investigation led to accusations of ritualistic abuse involving dozens of people. Children claimed to have witnessed satanic rituals, murder, and cannibalism. Many people were convicted. Most convictions were later overturned as false. Little Rascals Daycare, North Carolina. Accusations of satanic abuse led to convictions that were later overturned. Children described being taken to space in a hot air balloon and being abused by sharks in the ocean. The commonalities across these cases: young children as primary witnesses, coercive or suggestive interviewing techniques, escalating accusations, starting simple, becoming ritualistic, physically impossible claims taken seriously, lack of physical evidence explained away as proof of conspiracy, community hysteria leading to presumption of guilt, devastating consequences for the accused. The role of experts. As the panic spread, a cottage industry of experts on satanic ritual abuse emerged. These people traveled the country giving seminars to social workers, therapists, law enforcement, and prosecutors. They taught that satanic cults were widespread, organized, and multigenerational. They claimed these cults bred children for sacrifice. They said the cults had infiltrated every level of society, which is why they were so hard to detect. The lack of evidence for these claims was explained away. The conspirators were too sophisticated to leave evidence. Satanists allegedly held positions of power, police, judges, politicians, and actively covered up their crimes. This created an unfalsifiable hypothesis. Evidence of satanic abuse proved the conspiracy. Lack of evidence also proved the conspiracy. It showed how good they were at hiding it. Mental health professionals received training in identifying indicators of satanic ritual abuse, fear of certain colors, knowledge of sexual acts, even though this could be from normal exposure to media or conversations, nightmares, behavioral problems, any unusual behavior in children. These indicators were so broad that almost any child could be classified as potentially abused. Recovered memory therapy. Parallel to the daycare cases, another phenomenon emerged: adults recovering repressed memories of childhood satanic ritual abuse. Therapists practicing recovered memory therapy believed that many psychological problems in adults stemmed from repressed traumatic memories, particularly of childhood sexual abuse. They used hypnosis, guided imagery, and suggestion to help patients recover these memories. What they actually did was implant false memories. Patients who entered therapy with no memories of abuse would, after months or years of therapy, remember horrific satanic ritual abuse from their childhood. They'd remember being forced to participate in rituals, witnessing murders, even killing babies themselves. These memories were incredibly detailed and felt entirely real to the patients. But investigation consistently found no evidence. People accused by patients with recovered memories could prove they weren't where the memories placed them. The described events left no physical evidence. Siblings had no similar memories, but the therapists insisted the memories were real. They created support groups where patients would share their recovered memories, reinforcing each other's false narratives. One prominent case: Beth Rutherford remembered under therapy that her father, a clergyman, had raped her repeatedly and forced her to abort 2 pregnancies. Medical examination proved she was still a virgin and had never been pregnant. Her father's reputation was destroyed before the truth emerged. Thousands of families were torn apart by false recovered memories. Adult children cut off contact with their parents, convinced they'd been abused. Some parents were prosecuted based solely on recovered memories, though most such prosecutions eventually failed. The ritual abuse task forces. By the late 1980s, the panic had reached institutional levels. FBI agents were investigating alleged satanic conspiracies. Police departments had ritual abuse task forces. The problem? They found nothing. No evidence of organized satanic abuse. No evidence of ritual murder. No evidence of the vast conspiracies that were alleged. FBI agent Kenneth Lanning, who investigated ritualistic abuse claims extensively, published a report in 1992 concluding, There was no evidence of widespread satanic conspiracies. The claims didn't hold up to investigation. Alleged victims couldn't provide verifiable details. The evidence consistently proved to be misinterpreted, fabricated, or the result of suggestive interviewing. But this evidence-based conclusion was rejected by many believers, who accused Lanning and other skeptics of being part of the cover-up or of naively failing to see the conspiracy. The cultural products. The satanic panic generated cultural products that both reflected and amplified the fear. Talk shows, Sally Jesse Raphael, Geraldo Rivera, and others featured episodes on satanic abuse. Geraldo's 1988 special, Devil Worship, exposing Satan's underground, was watched by 20 million people and presented allegations as fact. Books. Numerous books claimed to expose satanic conspiracies. The Satan Cellar by Mike Warnke, later exposed as fabricated, claimed to reveal insider information about satanic cults. Training materials. Law enforcement and social workers received training materials teaching them to identify satanic abuse. These materials were filled with misinformation and encouraged seeing satanic symbolism everywhere. Religious media. Christian media extensively covered the panic, warning of satanic influence in society. Some claimed that popular culture, especially heavy metal and role-playing games, was actively recruiting for Satanism. This created a feedback loop. Media coverage created fear, which led to more accusations, which led to more media coverage. The McMartin verdicts. The McMartin trial began in 1987 and lasted until 1990, the longest criminal trial in American history. The prosecution's case relied entirely on children's testimony. The defense pointed out the obvious problems. Children had been subjected to coercive interviewing. The stories were physically impossible. There was no physical evidence, no tunnels, no photographs, no witnesses. The accusations only emerged after repeated questioning. The jury was faced with a choice: believe children's testimony despite all evidence to the contrary, or acknowledge that the children had been manipulated into false statements. In 1990, after deliberating for 9 weeks, the jury acquitted on 52 counts and deadlocked on 13. Ray Buckey was retried on the deadlocked counts. The second jury acquitted him on all counts in 1990. Not a single conviction. After 7 years, millions of dollars, and incalculable trauma, the most prominent satanic abuse case ended in complete acquittal. But the damage was done. Ray Buckey had spent years in jail. His career was destroyed. The school was bankrupted. Families were traumatized. And many people still believed the defendants were guilty, that the system had failed to convict obvious abusers. The overturned convictions. While McMartin ended in acquittal, many other cases resulted in convictions. Over the 1990s and 2000s, these convictions were systematically overturned as the evidence was re-examined. The Amirault family in Massachusetts. Gerald Amirault served 18 years before his conviction was overturned. His mother and sister also spent years in prison. The Kern County cases, numerous convictions were overturned. People had spent years in prison for crimes that never happened. Wenatchee cases, convictions were overturned as the investigation was revealed to be fundamentally flawed. In case after case, appellate courts found children had been subjected to suggestive questioning. Interviewers had used coercive techniques. Physical evidence didn't support the accusations. The trials had relied on debunked theories about recovered memory and satanic abuse. But justice was slow. People spent years or decades in prison before being exonerated. Some were never fully exonerated. They were released but not formally declared innocent. Their reputations remained destroyed. The science catches up. By the mid-1990s, scientific research had thoroughly debunked the key claims underlying the panic. Memory research. Elizabeth Loftus and others demonstrated that false memories can be easily implanted through suggestion. Memories are not perfect recordings. They're reconstructed each time we remember, and they're highly susceptible to suggestion and distortion. Interviewing research. Studies showed that young children are particularly susceptible to leading questions and suggestion. Proper forensic interviewing requires non-leading questions, but the interviews during the panic were textbook examples of how not to interview children. Satanic crime research. FBI and other law enforcement investigations found no evidence of organized satanic abuse. No bodies, no physical evidence, no credible witnesses. The alleged vast conspiracy didn't exist. Recovered memory therapy. Research showed that the techniques used in recovered memory therapy could create false memories. The American Psychological Association and other professional organizations issued warnings about these techniques. The scientific consensus was clear. The satanic panic was built on false foundations. The abuse described in these cases had not happened. The reckoning begins. Some participants in the panic began to recant or apologize. Some of the children who had testified in these cases, now adults, came forward to say they'd been pressured into false testimony. They described the coercive interviewing, the leading questions, the praise when they said what adults wanted to hear. Some therapists acknowledged they'd implanted false memories through suggestive techniques. Professional organizations revised their standards to prevent this. Some prosecutors admitted they'd pursued cases based on flawed evidence because of moral certainty and community pressure. But many never recanted. Some of the experts on satanic abuse continued to defend their claims despite the evidence. Some parents still believe their children were abused, even though the evidence shows otherwise. Some of the convicted defendants were never exonerated. The False Memory Foundation was established to support families torn apart by false recovered memories. They work to educate about the dangers of recovered memory therapy and to support falsely accused parents. The cost in lives. It's impossible to calculate the full damage of the satanic panic. Falsely accused, hundreds of people were accused. Dozens were convicted and imprisoned. Even those who were acquitted or had convictions overturned had their lives destroyed. Careers ended, savings exhausted on legal defense, reputations permanently damaged. Families destroyed. Thousands of families were torn apart by false recovered memories. Adult children cut off contact with their parents. Parents were accused of horrific abuse they never committed. Many of these relationships were never repaired. Children traumatized. The children subjected to coercive questioning were genuinely harmed by the investigation process. Being told repeatedly that you were abused, being praised for disclosing abuse, being isolated from dangerous adults. This created real trauma even though the alleged abuse never happened. Professionals' careers. Some people who questioned the panic or refused to go along with it faced professional consequences. Therapists who wouldn't practice recovered memory therapy lost clients. Prosecutors who expressed skepticism faced community backlash. Resources wasted. Millions of dollars and countless hours of law enforcement, legal, and therapeutic resources were devoted to investigating and prosecuting crimes that never happened. Resources that could have been used addressing real child abuse. Real abuse obscured. Perhaps most tragically, the panic may have made it harder to address actual child sexual abuse. When the high-profile cases turned out to be false, it created skepticism toward all abuse accusations. The hysteria undermined legitimate child protection efforts. How did this happen? Looking back, how did an entire society become convinced of something so demonstrably false? Moral panic dynamics. The panic followed the classic pattern of moral panics throughout history. A perceived threat to children activates protective instincts. Media amplification creates perception of an epidemic. Anyone who questions the narrative is seen as defending abusers. The panic becomes self-reinforcing. Confirmation bias. Once people believed in satanic abuse, they interpreted everything through that lens. Normal childhood behavior became indicators of abuse. Absence of evidence became evidence of a sophisticated cover-up. The belief was unfalsifiable. Social contagion. The panic spread through social networks. Parents, therapists, and law enforcement shared information, validating each other's fears. Communities reinforced the belief that abuse was happening. Authority figures. When experts validated the panic, when prosecutors pursued cases, when media reported accusations as fact, it gave the panic credibility. People trusted authorities who were themselves caught up in the panic. Genuine concern. Most participants in the panic had good intentions. They genuinely wanted to protect children. They believed they were uncovering real abuse. This made them vulnerable to believing claims that should have been questioned. The modern echoes. The satanic panic may be over, but its echoes continue. QAnon. The QAnon conspiracy theory, which claims a satanic pedophile ring controls the government, is a direct descendant of satanic panic beliefs. The narrative is similar. Secret satanic cabals abusing children, conspiracy reaching the highest levels. Only awakened people can see the truth. Pizzagate. The 2016 conspiracy theory that a Washington, D.C. pizzeria was the center of a child trafficking ring led to a man firing a rifle in the restaurant. The theory was entirely false, but it activated the same fears and beliefs as the satanic panic. Online witch hunts. Social media enables rapid spreading of accusations. People are publicly accused of abuse, harassment, or crimes with minimal evidence. Their lives are destroyed by online mobs before any investigation occurs. Due process is abandoned in favor of believing victims. Moral panics about technology. Modern panics about social media corrupting youth, about video games causing violence, about the internet harboring predators. These follow similar patterns to the satanic panic fears about D&D and heavy metal. Memory wars. While recovered memory therapy has been largely discredited, debates about memory continue. Some still defend aggressive memory recovery techniques despite the evidence of their dangers. The underlying dynamics haven't changed. We're still vulnerable to moral panics. We still abandon critical thinking when children's safety is involved. We still trust charismatic experts even when evidence is lacking. What should have happened? Looking back, what should have been done differently? Evidence-based investigation. Law enforcement should have required physical evidence, not just testimony elicited through suggestive questioning. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. Proper interviewing. Children should have been interviewed using proper forensic techniques. Non-leading questions, multiple interviewers, recorded sessions, no rewards for disclosure. Scientific skepticism. Extraordinary claims about satanic conspiracies should have been met with skepticism, not credulity. The burden of proof should have been on those making the claims. Media responsibility. Media should have covered accusations as allegations, not as established facts. They should have questioned claims rather than amplifying panic. Professional standards. Therapists should have been held to standards preventing suggestion and false memory creation. Law enforcement should have required actual evidence, not just belief. Due process. The accused should have been presumed innocent until proven guilty. Community hysteria should not have overridden basic legal protections. These seem obvious in hindsight, but in the moment, questioning the panic made you seem pro-abuse, anti-child, or part of the cover-up. It took courage to stand against the tide. The lessons. The satanic panic teaches us. Moral panics are dangerous. When we panic about threats to children, we abandon reason. We need to maintain skepticism even when emotions run high. Children's testimony requires careful handling. Children can be honest witnesses, but they're also highly suggestible. Proper interviewing techniques are essential. Memory is unreliable. Memories can be false, especially when created through suggestion. We can't trust memory alone, especially recovered memories. Absence of evidence matters. If an alleged vast conspiracy leaves no physical evidence despite extensive investigation, the conspiracy probably doesn't exist. Good intentions aren't enough. Most participants in the panic had good motives. But good intentions combined with bad methods cause harm. We're all vulnerable. It's easy to look back and think, I would never have fallen for this. But the panic swept up smart, educated, well-intentioned people. None of us are immune to moral panic. The unfinished business. Some people spent years in prison for crimes that never happened and were never fully exonerated. Some still maintain their innocence but carry criminal records. Families torn apart by false recovered memories never reconciled. Parents died estranged from their children. Adult children lived with the psychological burden of false memories of abuse. Some of the experts who promoted the panic never acknowledged their errors. Some of the accusers never admitted they were wrong. There's been no full reckoning, no truth and reconciliation process. The panic ended not with acknowledgement of error, but with quiet abandonment as the cases fell apart. The final verdict. In 2005, the last of the major satanic panic prosecutions reached its conclusion. After decades of litigation, appeals, and re-examinations, the verdict was clear. There was no satanic conspiracy. The ritual abuse didn't happen. The vast underground network of devil-worshipping child abusers never existed. It was a moral panic, nothing more. But what a panic it was. Hundreds of lives destroyed. Families torn apart. People imprisoned for crimes that existed only in imagination and false memory. What was real? Child sexual abuse is real. It's a serious problem that deserves serious attention. The satanic panic didn't happen because child abuse doesn't exist. It happened because genuine concern about a real problem spiraled into hysteria and fantasy. The tragedy is that the panic likely made the real problem worse. It wasted resources investigating imaginary conspiracies. It created skepticism toward real abuse allegations. It taught people that sometimes accusations can be completely false, and some people apply this lesson too broadly, dismissing real abuse. The warning. Right now, somewhere in America, someone is being accused of something they didn't do. The accusation will spread on social media. People will believe it without evidence. The accused person's life will be destroyed before any investigation. We like to think we've learned from the satanic panic, that we're more sophisticated now, more skeptical, more evidence-based. But we're not. The same dynamics that created the satanic panic are still with us. The same fear, the same certainty, the same willingness to abandon due process when we're convinced we're protecting children. The satanic panic wasn't an aberration. It was a revelation of how quickly rationality can collapse when fear takes over. How easily we believe the unbelievable when it confirms our anxieties. How readily we destroy lives in the name of protection. In the 1980s and 90s, America hunted monsters that didn't exist. We found them everywhere, in preschools, in therapists' offices, in recovered memories. We prosecuted them, imprisoned them, destroyed them. The real monsters were the ones we created. The panic itself, the hysteria, the willingness to believe anything as long as it was sufficiently horrible. Ray Buckey spent 5 years in jail waiting for a trial that would acquit him. Gerald Amirault spent 18 years in prison for abuse that never happened. Hundreds of families were destroyed by false recovered memories. All of it preventable. All of it foreseeable. All of it the result of abandoning evidence, reason, and due process in the face of moral panic. The satanic panic is over. The beliefs that drove it are not. They're waiting for the next trigger, the next crisis, the next opportunity to make us forget everything we should have learned. There were no satanic cults. There were no ritual sacrifices. There were no vast conspiracies. But there were real victims, the people we accused, prosecuted, and destroyed in our hunt for monsters that existed only in our collective imagination.